This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. This show was made by HCLTech, a company that believes in partnerships so much you can read their name on the Australian shirt. This show leans in hard on data and technology, so we are proud to work with HCLTech, leaders in their field. Let us talk about Bishen Bedi. So he was a fantastic bowler for those who aren't aware, very important in Indian cricket history. And passed away today. Actually, when it came up on the screen, I wondered if I'd missed it because it looked like the sort of thing that they would just put up randomly rather than someone having passed away at the moment, during the World Cup. So I was very sad to see that. I know he'd been struggling with his health for a little while, but I think when you're talking about Bishen Bedi, what you have to do is you have to start with the flight. Even in his era, spinners were starting to get a lot quicker. Chandrasekhar and Underwood were properly quick. That was part of their deadliness. But Bishen Bedi was slow. And his balls really, really took their time. They had like a narrative to them. Even when the batter knew what the story was, Bishen Bedi still managed to suck them in. And you watch him bowl, and it was just an absolute dream. You know, some left-arm finger spinner lover went to bed one night, and their vision was this, right? It is just absolutely beautiful. So smooth, and the arc of the balls and everything that he did about it, and the way he straightened them. And it was as if he floated to the crease and delivered whispers. Yeah. And it looked easy, but of course, many other people have tried to do this before, but I'm sure so many kids out there tried to imitate his action because it was absolutely beautiful. And what I loved about him was the ability that he could bowl all day, but just make the tiniest changes over and over again to get on top. But it's also worth saying that as beautiful as he was, and yes, aesthetically very pleasing, he had some serious skills. When he retired, he had the most wickets of any Indian bowler in Test cricket at that point. And, this was an era when Indian cricket really began to move on. And him and, of course, his friends in the quartet of spin was the spine of Indian cricket at that point. So, and if you look at him compared to the quartet, and these are all fantastic bowlers. I think Venkat, obviously maybe goes on to be a little bit more known as an umpire, but he was a fantastic bowler as well. And he probably did a lot more of the dirty work for them as well, whereas the other guys got slightly more of the credit. But to be the bowler here with the best average out of this lot, I think also says so much about him, because there are no bad bowlers on this list. Another thing I wanted to point out is he was someone who was very good at taking wickets worldwide. I think his record in India was 23. But you see, overall in Asia, he averaged 26. But this is what he did in Australia. And I think this is from maybe about 12 or 13 test matches. He was absolutely brilliant at bowling spin in Australia in an era when I think, especially towards the end of the 70s, Australia was sort of not as friendly to spinners as it had been before. Covered wickets were obviously a bigger thing. Australia had fast bowlers. They weren't producing a lot of great spinners themselves. They had changed a little bit. And for him to be so good, he completely dominated New Zealand as well. So this is not a guy who was just good in Asia and didn't make it work anywhere else. Certainly his spin could travel. But the most important thing is, even when he was in the UK or in the West Indies, teams found it really, really hard to score off him. And if you're asking how hard it was to score off him, he has the fourth best economy rate in the history of Test cricket. Right? He was deadly accurate with what he did, and the way he bowled, and you might have seen it in the clips that I showed you at the start, is he basically bowled in a way that made you take a chance off him. And especially, he didn't bowl in the most conservative era, but he bowled certainly in a more conservative era than we have today. And teams just would not do that. And so he was the sort of player who was willing to wait. And I'm going to show you, this is absolutely remarkable. But this is his average in each innings of a test match. He was literally willing to wait the first innings, the second innings, and the third innings until he could do this at the end. I've never seen a bowler do this before, right? A lot of spinners are a little bit more in this area, and then they might have something around here. He was absolutely absolutely dominant once he got to the fourth inning. So essentially, he's playing Test cricket, and a lot of the time, he's just waiting to get a bowl either in the second innings, although you see there's not as much of a leap there, but certainly when he gets to the last innings, where he becomes a completely different bowler. So he's almost a holding bowler for the first three innings, and then a destroyer of worlds at the end. And because of all this holding bowling, you'll actually see that his strike rate. So he took a wicket every 80 balls in Test cricket, right? You can see, not exactly Dale Steyn, is he? Completely different. And the other two guys, I think this is Lance Gibbs, and then this is Garfield Sobers. Garfield Sobers bowled a lot of junk spin because he bowled as the second spinner, despite the fact he also bowled as the opening bowler, bowling seam up. Remarkable player, but on very, very flat pitches. He would have to bowl for hours on end, bowling left arm finger spin, and then sometimes he would change and bowl left arm wrist spin. And Lance Gibbs is the, probably the prototypical defensive off spinner, just stayed on a length all day, made you hit him off that length. And again, these two both bowled in a very, very in an era where wickets didn't fall very quickly, and then on pitches that were really, really flat at times. So you could argue that Bishen Bedi is it took him the longest to strike of any bowler in the history of cricket. So he had an incredible amount of patience, the way that he actually went about that. But I don't want to make him feel like he was like some Zen master or anything, because he had a lot of fire and would get very, very angry at times. In fact, if you don't know him as a cricketer, you probably know him as a pundit. And as a pundit, absolutely would say his mind. I saw a lot of people say he was politically incorrect, but he wasn't one of those people who was politically incorrect. He's one of those people who just said what he said, and then you had to deal with it. And that's how he went about it. But he was certainly... he did that once in a cricket game in a way that we've maybe never seen before. This is the famous test match in Sabina Park. That essentially is the test match that starts the West Indies using 4 fast bowlers and going all in on fast bowling, short bowling, forgetting about spin. So you can see that India make 306, but this is in the first innings, but they declare 6 down. He doesn't come into bat. Neither does Chandrasekhar. You can also see a retired hurt here and a retired hurt here, right? It's an extraordinary scorecard, but this is the second innings where Amarnath does really, really well. And you can see none of these guys batted. He just folded the innings. He just didn't think there was any point in, especially the bowlers, and some of these guys were also already injured from the first innings. We just didn't think there was any point of actually going out and facing that kind of bowling in that situation. I think they had a slight lead when he declared, but it wasn't very many, and the West Indies went on to win that game very, very easily. But that's the person he was. And, I think... he played his cricket this way and he lived his life this way. It didn't always do the thing that perhaps other people wanted him to do, or the thing that people would accept as socially acceptable. He just did what Bishen Bedi wanted to do, which would be waiting for 3 innings, for the match to finally come his way. This is the most test wickets during his career. So I just wanted to point out here a little bit that... this was not just an ordinary bowler who dominated in India. The times when he was bowling, only Derek Underwood took the most wickets. And it's really, really interesting because of what we just talked about with the West Indies. So the leading wicket taker in his time is Derek Underwood, so another finger spinner. Then you got Bedi, another finger spinner. You got Chandrasekhar, the wrist spinner. And then we got Lance Gibbs, who we talked about before, as another finger spinner, right? At this stage, finger spin and occasionally wrist spin, but generally finger spin outside of Chandrasekhar, and then obviously Abdul Qadir comes in off the back of this. They were the dominant. You can see Prasanna is here as well. Those are the guys that took the most wickets at that point. Ashley Mallett's on this list. There's a lot of spinners on this list. And what actually happens, of course, is that test match that he was captain of is what changes everything, and the West Indies completely change everything. So as his career is finishing, it really is a changing of eras. And he is, the cornerstone of that, because he is such a slow finger spinner. And, there's such a remarkable thing. He looks like a bowler from the 1930s, even when he's bowling in the 1960s and 1970s, compared to some of the other spinners on this list. And as he finishes his career, finger spin and wrist spin kind of die, right? It's not that teams don't continue to try it, but the domination really comes from the seam bowling after this. First with the West Indies, then even with Australia and South Africa. Even though Australia have Shane Warne, it takes a long time before we start to see the finger spinners rise back up on this kind of a board. But there is, I've shown you he's the second best wicket taker of his era. That's fantastic. I found something even more remarkable today that if I knew it before, I'm not sure. This is all the bowlers in Test cricket with 50 victims in the fourth innings, right? There's some very good bowlers on this list. That's Bishen Bedi. In the fourth innings of Test match, he averaged 14.46 and he went in an economy of 1.83. When we got to the fourth innings, there has never been a more destructive bowler than Bishen Bedi. He was maybe a defensive bowler throughout the rest of the game and an aesthetic bowler and everything else. But there is no doubt that when it got to the end of that game, he was the greatest fourth innings bowler we have ever had. And he's not particularly close. Ambrose is a distance back from him, right? He was absolutely incredible in this sort of situation. And everything else, to average 14.46 in one innings of a Test match. I just, he was an absolute, a fantastic player. And I think probably will be underestimated by a lot of fans going forward, just because there's not a lot of footage of him. It was really hard for me to put together even the clips that I found. And mostly I found them from Australia and England. There are even fewer really good clips I could find online of him from India. But just a fantastic bowler, and I'd love to let's just beautiful little run up. It's just a dream. Like, you watch him bowl and it is like a dream. But what I love about this is, yes, he was a dream to watch, but if you were facing him in the fourth innings, he was an absolute nightmare. Just a confident man, knew exactly what he wanted to do. And I hope that he enjoys himself in the spin bowlers Valhalla. Absolutely deserves to go down as one of the greats of our game. A dream and a nightmare all in one. Like, you can't ask for much more than that, can you?